You're listening to 95.7 FM, KDRT LP, Davis, California.
Inch by inch, row by row, oh, to make this garden grow. All it takes is a rake and a hoe and a piece of fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, someone bless these seeds I sow. Someone warm them from below till the rain comes tumbling down. Pulling weeds and picking stones, man is made of dreams and bones. Feel the need to grow my own, 'cause the time is close at hand. Grain for grain, sun and rain, find my way in nature's chain. Tune my body and my brain to the music from the land. Inch by inch, row by row, oh, to make this garden grow.
And the garden song means it's time for the Davis Garden Show. This is Don Shore.
And Lois Richter on a bright, beautiful, sunny Davis day.
Spectacularly sunny and clear out there. And
but north wind.
Visibility is unlimited except for the dust being kicked up. Here are some interesting stats. North wind right now is 21 miles an hour, gusting up to 30 miles an hour. And the humidity is 17%. 61 degrees right now, going up to a high today of 79. Sunny and breezy is the term that the Weather Service likes to use for this conditions. Breezy, yes.
Yeah, right.
They call this a red flag warning. And obviously, if you've been reading the news at all, even my daughter sent me a note and said, "Is your power on out there?" Because Pacific Gas and Electricity announced everywhere. They got this information out. Let me tell you that there was a very high likelihood they'd be shutting off power in areas where there was a risk of wildfire. And these gusty winds meant that was about 28 possible counties in Northern California and Central California, and the power has been out in a number of places.
Mostly those are places that have hills and trees on them, and that's not Davis, so we have not had power outage here.
Yeah, but my wholesale grower up in Auburn had to call me on the telephone to take their order today because their website wasn't working because their power wasn't on. Mm-hmm. This is the last day of this wind, of this kind of level of wind, and then it's going to be a little breezy tomorrow, but, maybe...
Our breezy, not their breezy.
5 to 8 miles an hour,
yeah.
And going up to a high of 80. 46 degrees Friday night. Night temperatures are in the mid-40s here in the Sacramento Valley. 81 degrees on Saturday. Sunny, mostly cleared. Saturday night, 47 degrees. 79 on Sunday. Let's see what the long range is. Columbus Day, which I guess is a holiday for some people. 77 degrees. 48 Monday night. Tuesday, 78. So we're going to be upper 70s, mid to upper 40s into the next 4 or 5 days. See if
it's autumn.
It is sort of. It's our kind of autumn.
Yeah.
Yes, it doesn't feel very autumn-like with
Sure
this kind of
does.
wind advisory. And
Which happens every autumn.
Temperatures. Yeah, it doesn't look like any rain or anything. Yeah. There's an interesting comment. Tom Loffman is a meteorologist. He's been on one of the TV stations for years. He said he saw the likelihood of rain a week or two out. So
how can you know that?
Well,
it's so far
they
ahead.
can look at the models and see what's coalescing out there and see what direction it's heading and go, I guess it's going to hit here. So Pacific frontal system looks to approach the area Wednesday with some increasing clouds and move inland with precipitation over some of the area starting possibly Wednesday or Thursday, but this is light to moderate and mostly the places that get rain, not here. So it's going to change a bit. It won't be so windy. Let me show you something interesting, Lois. I did this, the effect that this north wind has on the humidity. I just mentioned the humidity right now is 17%.
And it's noon.
It's not even, it's not,
usually our humidity is in the 20s when it's like 4 in the afternoon.
It was, yesterday the humidity was 10% in Dixon, and so I just went ahead and looked up Death Valley, where it was 9%. So we were comparable basically to desert weather conditions. And this is relevant mainly to gardeners in as much as it affects your watering. There's a little side-by-side 2 days in a row of what the humidity was at different times of day. Our typical pattern here, folks, is that the humidity at night goes up to the 70% plus range by about sunrise. It could be 60, 70, 80%, and then it drops. And of course, our daytime humidity is very low. It's very dry. I mean, we're not quite desert-like normally, but we never got above 20% humidity in about a 24-hour period.
And looking at the, just okay, so we have on the 8th and the 9th, our low humidity was 18% and 17%. Our high humidity on those days was 80% and 75%.
About sunrise, roughly. Yeah. Yep.
But looking at the
yesterday.
Oh my goodness! So the low humidity was 10%. And the high humidity was 16.
Yeah, so we had desert-like conditions with 20 to 30 mile an hour winds. I mean, they're giving you the sustained wind speed there, and then the gusty winds, and the wind speeds were hitting
quite a
17 to 21, 24, 30 miles an hour, gusts up to 40. The reason this is relevant for gardeners is it means, well, we talk about the ET rate. This is the evapotranspiration rate. During north wind events with 10% humidity, that evapo part of the ET rate is the relevant one. And we had been monitoring the weather stations just to see what's happening with the ET rate over the last couple weeks as things were cooling off finally after that spike of high temperatures. And we were getting down to about anywhere from 30 to 40% below a typical summer evapotranspiration rate. So yeah, you could go out and if you have a smart timer, it's probably already adjusting for that. If you're the smart part of the timer, you might have been adjusting for that. Evapotranspiration rate yesterday and today is very likely about the same here and in Southern California, where Santa Ana winds are doing the same thing as a summer day. Mm-hmm. So you're back to July readings for the next day or two and then tapering back off again. If you've got a smart timer that's based on soil moisture sensors, great, it'll figure that out. If you're the one that goes out and does it, you better bump that back up. And we're seeing, of course, by August, we start to see the problems with insufficient irrigation. By September, they're getting pretty extreme. By October, because we don't see any rain here until the end of the month at the earliest, we're at our peak period of plant stress. Mm-hmm. You would think July would be worse, but no, we've gone all summer.
The soil is so dry, it just sucks up everything that touches it.
Depends on how you've been watering, and so that's the conversation we have. And I know a designer who's dealing with two different clients right now. She's doing the follow-up on it. She's doing these were planted a year ago, and some things are failing. That happens. A certain percent of the plants will fail. One of them, the sprinkler system, was installed by a professional and set to run every week for 45 minutes, once a week. 45 minutes, drip system.
Drip system?
Which held the plants until about early July, and then things really started going south at that point.
Wow.
We don't know what he was thinking. Maybe he was thinking it'll be increased at some point, but it wasn't. So obviously by October, with her visit in October, lots of plants looking very, very, very stressed. The other client...
Some would be dead by now.
Yeah, some indeed are, yes. The other one was also installed by a professional, very good landscaper, set it to run every day. And I don't remember how long it's running every day, but every time she checks, plants are rotting. And so you have professionally installed drip irrigation systems set, and then they're done. The contractor is done. Mm-hmm. And we, being the nursery people, 3, 4, 5 months later, are the ones that start talking to the customer about why this plant looks toasted and that plant looks shriveled. Take your pick, over or under watering. We try to use the terms more precisely. Watering too often, rotting it at the crown, killing the plant, usually because of Phytophthora, but because of the environmental conditions of saturated soil around the crown. Or simply a plant that isn't getting sufficient water to make root growth because of the insufficient depth of watering. Simple solution in that case, water longer. In the other case, water less often. Deep, infrequent waterings are really the way to go for almost anything, few exceptions being containers and raised planters. And in this wind, you better water those containers and raised planters pretty often. We're watering our bedding plants at our nursery right now twice a day.
Of course, those are little tiny things, too.
Yes, and if they go into a bigger pot, they still have that root establishment to go through, so it's daily at first. They do root in quickly. That's the good news, but you got to keep an eye on them when the humidity is this low and the wind is blowing.
Okay, so I have a question about my Japanese maples. Now, in my house, I have a lovely area outside the bedroom, bathroom area. It's a little courtyard. No doors or windows get to it from the outside, just from in our house. And I have established that if I go once a month, well, okay, when the rain stops, after the last rainstorm, a month after that, I water. I soak it for hours with one soaker hose. And then a month later and a month later and a month later.
Yeah.
Now, at this point, it is autumn. It is October. This is a Japanese maple. The leaves are looking like they're getting ready to fall off.
A little early for
Do
that.
I need to water again?
Yes.
Yeah, soak it again,
Yes.
even though the leaves aren't growing.
Yeah, and this is the kind of answer that's going to vary depending on where you all are listening to us. Because,
Yeah.
yes, in California, we won't have any rain until the end of October. We won't have enough rainfall to really make a difference until perhaps the middle of November. And that's in an average year. And we are at the point where the soil is at its absolute driest in terms of natural rainfall. I mean, we had a nice wet winter last year, and the reservoirs are brimming, and there's plenty of water. But the soil itself, we haven't seen rain here since the third week of May, and that one was surprising. Remember
Yeah,
that?
that was a
that was
shock.
and that was pretty much gone by July. And this is why I've made charts that show, when I'm giving talks, that show kind of when the stored water from winter rain is running out for different plants with different rooting depths. I'd say your Japanese maple is intermediate in that it's well established, but it's a high water plant. And I'm surprised you're able to water once a month, actually, and still have it look good.
Well, it's next to the house. It's in a shady place. It's got a fence around it. There's not a lot of wind. There's no sun on it. I mean, on the bottom.
Right.
So it's
good place for a Japanese maple.
And
yeah.
I let those leaves build up. There's about 8 inches of leaf
Mulched.
on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have lots of Japanese maples, and I consider them among the higher water trees on my property. The Japanese maples and the birches that I like, so I have them. I water once a week, very, very, very thoroughly, basically cycling with part of my orchard. But again, they're mulched either with living mulch, i.e. ground cover, or leaf debris and stuff that I've piled in that area.
So you
that's
think
important.
more than once a month would be better for them?
Depends on how it's looking. One thing to go by is plant performance. I mean, really, the basic check on your irrigation systems is how are the plants doing. But this requires a professional to some degree. I know how much growth you should be getting on a plant.
These don't grow.
If you've got a crepe myrtle, for example, and it's only growing 6 to 12 inches a year, and you have it in a low water landscape, and you've got it on drip irrigation with all the other things, you're underwatering it. It would be growing 2 to 5 feet a year, most varieties, if they're properly watered, at least during the early portion of the growth season, May, June, July, until those shoots terminate and bloom. So if your Japanese maple isn't growing 1 to 2 feet a year at least, then it's probably not getting sufficient water. If you don't mind
it's
that,
sort of bonsai'd.
if you don't mind that, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, so
Okay.
this is part of it.
I was watering
is,
trying to keep it green.
yeah, well, that's a good start.
Okay.
It's not looking toasted, so
No? Well, it is now because it's autumn.
yeah. Well,
It always does that. It crinkles its edges and starts to drop leaves.
but it shouldn't do that. It should turn color, lovely fall color,
Beautiful.
and then drop its leaves. And if it's turning brown and dropping leaves, you're not
No,
watering
it's
it.
crinkling its edges.
Yeah.
Okay.
We should go ahead and mention upcoming events at the UC Davis Arboretum. Let's see, there was a sale that happened. There's
There'll be another one.
Another sale, October 12th.
It's always another one.
October 12th, sale, Do-It-Yourself Pollinator Paradise, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. These sales take place at the Arboretum Teaching Nursery. And then the weekday plant sale for UC Davis affiliates, which is students, academics, staff, alumni, retirees, volunteers, donors, and more. It pretty much covers almost everyone in this town. Invited to shop. Don't miss the pop-up talks on pollinators and California native plants led by UC Davis Arboretum and Public Garden horticulturists beginning at 11:30, 12:30, and 1:30. That's October 16th. That's a weekday,
Yeah.
11 a.m. to 2 p.m. For information about that, arboretum.ucdavis.edu. And, of course, the folk music jam sessions continue the next one, October 18th, noon to 1, at the Wyatt Deck in the UC Davis Arboretum.
What's the date today, Don?
I don't know. 10th. October 10th. Is it the 10th? Yes.
10th, yeah.
Yes.
So
Yes,
next
that's right there.
Wednesday is that sale. And coming up, we also have the Blue Mango's 40th anniversary. Now, the Blue Mango isn't there anymore.
Nope.
But it was a wonderful place when it was there. And it had a big impact on town, I think. So anyway, there's going to be a celebration. KDRT is hosting. And it's going to be at Parkside, which is where the Blue Mango used to be, if you can remember that, 330 G Street. And it is Friday, October 18th, 6 to 9 p.m. There's going to be lots of music and food and talk and stuff. And the day before that, I will have some of the blue mango historians on my show, and so you can hear the history of what was that blue
So now
mango
we've
anyway.
got people listening in Portugal and Japan going, there are blue mangoes? The Blue Mango
No.
was a cooperatively run restaurant.
Vegetarian.
Vegetarian restaurant in Davis. And it was quite an icon. And then finally closed up and got replaced. Local residents know where the Little Prague restaurant was. That was the site of Blue Mango way, way back when.
Right.
And a lot of the
And-
old timers are still here.
And we will tell you why it's named the blue mango.
There are no blue mangoes that I'm aware of.
No, there's not, but the story was interesting, and you can listen to that next week. Okay, that's it for
A
my
bunch of
announcements.
stuff
Now
there.
we got stuff. Oh, well, here's one more. Sacramento chapter of the Rare Fruit Growers Society, January Scion Exchange in Sacramento. Mark your calendars for January 19th. We'll tell you where it is later.
No, we're going to tell you where it is now.
You kn-
was
you
the
got
update.
it?
Yep, it's on Engle. It's at the La Sierra Community Center in Carmichael, the same place they've had it
Oh,
the
good.
last few years, which is on Engle Road, Suite 100. So that Scion is the top part of a grafted fruit tree. Scion Exchange, well, that means you can go there and they'll have budwood. People will bring budwood.
Bring twigs.
They'll bring branches, yes, and they're really, really nice folks that can tell you how to bud and graft and give you pointers on it. And you can talk about, how to get 2 or 3 trees on one stalk and what's compatible and what isn't. I mean, these are questions that come up to me at my shop all the time.
Really?
And I frequently refer people to the Sacramento chapter of the California Rare Fruit Growers, very active on Facebook. So just look for CRFG or California Rare Fruit Growers, Sacramento chapter. It's a great way to get more fruit trees, interesting fruit trees. They have meetings. They talk about unusual varieties of, I have friends who are in that group who have 10, 20, 30 varieties of figs.
Wow.
All packed into a small backyard. I have one customer who's got a really cool garden here in Davis. Each of her mandarin trees is 4 varieties because she didn't have room for that many mandarin trees.
But
so
she wanted to try
just
them
kept
all.
budding on until she has 4 on each one. And I think the champion of all is Joe up in Woodland, who has something like 170 plum varieties on one tree.
One tree.
Yes, he bought his house, and it had one of those red leaf flowering plums. I'm fond of them, but they're pretty useless trees. They don't give shade or anything like that.
They don't have edible
Yeah,
fruit.
now it's edible, but you have one. I mean,
No, I don't.
You have this flowering plum that pops up in yards and has a little sweet fruit.
No, that's crabapple.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway.
Anyway.
So this one, he had it. It was there. He was going to take it out. I thought, well, why not just start budding on,
You can
good
try,
plums.
you might try grafting.
Pretty
What
soon
the
he was
heck?
up to a couple dozen. Pretty soon he was up to several dozen. Pretty soon he was up to 100.
And
I
he,
show-
he's the scientist, so he has all these records, right?
He has them all tagged, or at least he knows which ones are which. I have a picture that I show when I give talks of, a dozen different, happened to get a picture that he took with a dozen different types of plums in the shot, all on the same tree. So it can be fun.
All ripe?
No, they ripen at different times. So
Well, that's
you gotta
good.
Got to keep close.
But 100
track.
different, wow.
Listen, I have issues with this principle for the average home gardener. When people come in and ask me for multi-graft trees, I say, there are problems with this. You've got to keep track of what's what.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're pruning, you might inadvertently cut off the branch that's the pollinizer or something like that. We ran into that when we had a pruning service. For a hobbyist, it's great. It can be lots of fun.
Lots of fun.
So maybe we can get some more information from them about what kinds of things will be at the Scion Exchange. All right, they've got some questions and things there. I shoved at you.
Okay, so here's let's go for the question first, and then we'll ask you about the other thing. Hi, Don. I bought a large bag of soil at another nursery. After I planted 10 new
glad you said
plants,
that.
I noticed that there were lots of whiteflies on just those plants. I purchased the soil 6 months ago. Is it possible that there were whiteflies eggs in that bag? If so, what should I do with the soil? I know the whiteflies will be gone as the winter gets colder. Should I just keep the soil and hope the eggs die in the bag? Thank you so much for your help with my gardening questions.
It is, fortunately, unlikely that the soil was the source of whiteflies. Now, many people confuse fungus gnats and whiteflies. Fungus gnats could have been in the soil. That's certainly possible. If you've ever grown houseplants and been sitting near your houseplants and suddenly noticed these kind of annoying things like fruit flies are sort of flying around and flying on the page that you're trying to read and so on. Those
Tiny
are
little
yeah,
things.
and they're little fly. They're a gnat. They're a fungus gnat. Those are something living. Their larvae live on the fungus that's growing in your potting soil. Often a sign that perhaps your soil is a little rich in compost or that you're keeping it too wet, but they're mostly just annoying. They're not really something, they don't hurt the plant particularly. That's not a whitefly, but a lot of people think they are.
Because they're flies and they're white.
And they're sort of white, and they sort of flutter around aimlessly like whiteflies do, and they're about the same size. Whiteflies are bright white, and they're usually on outdoor plants, almost always, rarely on indoor plants. And you see them fluttering around particular plants that they're breeding on or others that they're landing on. Mint plants, verbena family members are quite susceptible as host plants for them to breed on, and then you'll find them sitting on citrus and cannas and things like that. It's almost certain that that's not where they came from. Very likely they came from another plant in the art, or there were some larvae or eggs on the plants that you bought. That's possible. And it's a late season phenomenon here. We just, whiteflies are there from April, May, June. At low levels, you're not really noticing them a whole lot. And then we just have this explosion of them in the late summer. I noticed that when I moved here. People always come in and say, I'm harvesting my tomatoes. There's whiteflies all over the place. What should I do about it? Well, you're harvesting your tomatoes. Don't worry about it. They're not really going to harm the plant all
They're
that
too
much.
small to get through the skin of a tomato.
Yeah, they're larvae. The adults don't do anything. The larvae are sucking insects comparable to aphids. They're on the leaves. They're only stressing the plant in that regard. So there's really nothing to worry about in terms of the damage they do to a vegetable plant or something like that. In our nursery yard, obviously, we don't wish to sell people plants that have whiteflies on them. So we monitor the plants that we know are typical host plants. Monitoring is a fancy term for as you walk by, shake it a little bit.
See what flutters out,
Brush
if
it.
anything.
See, and I check the undersides of the leaves, but I have the staff watch the mint and the verbena and the lantana, certain plants that we know are typical host plants for them. Shake it a little bit. If a few adults flutter up, it's time for the rinse. And the rinse cycle is, we actually have a little short thing at davisgardenshow.com where Lois and I talked about this for 5 or 10 minutes. You can scroll down and find our discussion. But the brief synopsis is rinse vigorously every morning, again midday if you like, for several days in a row. And I mean vigorously, not showering. I always have to show each new staff person. I don't mean an overhead
No
water.
sprinkles,
This is not
but-
overhead watering. The joke I always make is we don't want clean whiteflies. We want dead whiteflies. And so you
Or washed off whiteflies.
dead is best, and we want to take off the shower nozzle so that you're using the thing that makes it really come out with some force. And when people watch us doing this, they go, "Oh, you really mean that?" Yes, I really mean that. If it's a little tender plant, I hold it with my hand to rinse it. Otherwise, I'm just giving it a nice fire hose treatment
And make sure you get underneath
under the leaves as
yeah.
much as possible, and you do that every day for 3 to 5 days in a row. The population of whiteflies will drop dramatically because you're washing off the eggs, you're washing off a couple of the larval stages, at least 2 of them, and you're probably killing a lot of the adults. And the reason you got to do it each day is some more hatch that you didn't quite get the first time. But generally, we find 3 to 5 days in a row will take care of it. And water's cheap and easy, and it's something you can do early in the day if you're listening in an area where humidity is high in the afternoon. Nothing to worry about here. We can go into
8%.
We often go ahead and do it right again at 4 or 5 in the evening as we're getting ready to leave because we know they'll dry off by sunset. So that's the main thing is you want the leaves to dry off before the end of the day. It really is effective for not only dispersing and killing whiteflies, but also managing spider mites and makes the plants look better too. So
And I actually have had whiteflies on houseplants,
It
but
happens,
that's
yeah.
because I bring Abutilon in as houseplants. So a couple of times I
Yeah.
have to go through this process.
Abutilon is in the mallow family. Anything in the mallow family is a typical
like it.
host. They like hibiscus. They like Abutilon. So those are you just learn after a while that when certain plants you see them and certain ones you don't. There's plants we find them on with shiny, thick leaves like citrus and cannas.
They're just sitting
They're
there,
not apparently breeding. They're just sitting there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question has to do with all of these jargon terms that we have. And this next one is, what is the dew point and why does it matter?
The dew point is very important to us because we don't get to the dew point here from about early May through the end of October.
So does that mean rain?
That means that means dew. The dew point is the visible thing. The dew point, I'll read you what Wikipedia says.
Okay.
Why not? The dew point is the temperature to which the air cools to become saturated with water vapor. When further cooled, the airborne water vapor will condense to form liquid water. We call those droplets. When air cools to its dew point through contact with a surface that is colder than the air, water will condense on the surface. We don't see
Forming dew.
We don't see dew here all summer. And sometime in October, we'll start to see dew. And that means if you're up early enough, you have to get out there about sunrise to see it because the humidity drops very rapidly as soon as the sun comes up here. What that matters is once you get dew on the surface of leaves, certain disease problems will show up. End of season disease problems. So people get concerned about them, but they're actually nothing to be concerned about. If you've got verbena or some of these other summer perennials that are kind of past their peak of bloom, getting ready to be cut back, you start to get dew on the leaves, they'll get mildew, or they'll get leaf spot diseases or things like that. Well, you know what? Cut them back. That's the simplest thing to do.
That's your to-do list.
Can we keep running this?
Oh,
pun-
we can
pun
do
as
that,
long as
Don.
possible?
We can do that forever.
So it's just a sign that the weather has turned, that we're getting into more fall-like conditions. Now, I know there are places where people garden. It's hard for me to imagine this, where you get dew all through the summer.
Yeah.
So that makes certain plants harder for you to grow without all these fungus problems than they are for us. We're very dry here from May through October. And
Yeah.
so all those summer plants basically have almost nothing. And then the question a lady asked the other day was, well, where do those diseases come from? Can't I just deal with that? And the comment really is they were there. They're present. Fungal spores, bacterial diseases are present, just like with people. But something predisposes the plant to finally being inoculated and affected by that particular disease. And what it usually is, almost every fungus and bacteria has a particular range of temperature and humidity. And it needs moisture on the leaf is one of the most common things they need. So we don't see mildew on verbena here all summer long until late October. Suddenly the dew starts to form. We start to see mildew on the leaves. Well, you know, it's part of the late. One person on Facebook said it's just that late summer ick. Well, that's an interesting technical term for it. It can be any of a half dozen diseases, and people often want me to say, well, what is this disease? I say, well, it's either
So late summer ick.
powdery mildew, downy mildew, septoria leaf. So, I mean, I could rattle off a half dozen different things it could be, but it doesn't matter because there's no...
It's autumn. It's October.
It's October. That's the problem. There's
Yeah.
no corrective for it. It's just a sign it's time to cut those things back. Some plants don't get these, but a lot of the summer flowering perennials do. And it's just a sign that we finally reached the dew point.
Okay, so now you've confused me because if the dew point makes mildew, then why do my lilacs have mildew all summer long when it's dry?
They're probably in the shade. And now mildew, powdery mildew itself, is more of a Western states disease than Eastern states disease because it can actually inoculate and infect at lower humidity than most others. For example, the sequence of rose diseases, and your lilac would be similar pattern, the sequence of rose diseases is downy mildew hits first. That's in February, March when it's wet, rainy. You know we get a rainstorm, it's going to get the spots on the leaves, it'll splash and blow from plant to plant. Then we get black spot, we get rust, and then powdery mildew forms later. Actually, it washes off the leaf. You can actually rinse powdery mildew off, unlike all these other diseases. It doesn't penetrate the leaf. But if you're getting powdery mildew chronically on your lilac, it's probably in too much shade.
I have a silver-leafed lilac now.
Yeah. Does it bloom?
Oh, yes.
Is it
That's why I'm
satisfactory?
keeping it. I'm
Yeah.
keeping it because it blooms. And people driving down the street can think I have a special
It's a
silver-leafed bush.
Glaucus lilac. I have one that was in full sun when it was planted.
That's right.
It blooms beautifully. It has become increasing shade in that area now, so it gets mildew. I've thought of moving it, but since it blooms fine, I'm not too worried about it.
I would think moving it would be a real challenge.
It would, and this is a tree bush that's been in the ground for 20 years. It would
That's
be a lot.
right.
I'd rather just plant another lilac somewhere else and just see what happens to
Besides,
this
I
one.
don't have any sunny spots.
No, there are places that you will walk into that you have a disease, they will sell you a fungicide. And in most cases with these late summer diseases, my feeling is that would be unnecessary.
Yeah.
I can't think of any of them where it really is life-threatening to the plant or any problem like that. So I discourage the use of broad-spectrum fungicides in general, and I just don't think any of these are worth that. But those of you growing roses, especially in rainier climates, you probably are on a fairly regular spray cycle for your roses, or you hopefully have found the ones that don't require it, which I'm told exist. Your lilac, my best suggestion there would be to make sure just get it out into more sun if you or plant a new one in more sun.
Okay, this is October, the beginning of October. What is this incredibly fragrant shrub that's flowering right now?
There are 3 of them.
Aha.
And I went ahead, for those of you listening in different climate zones, and pulled up the zones for each of these. Because right now, you can have this unbelievable fragrance from one of 3 different possible shrubs. That's true here in the Sacramento Valley, Southern California, and some colder climates in the case of one of them. The first one is Osmanthus fragrans.
Sweet olive.
Fragrans is a great name. Species name tells you right there what you're dealing with. Sweet olive. It's not an olive, but it has this powerful fragrance. Occasionally you'll see Osmanthus flowers used in tea. I've seen that at Pete's where they have Osmanthus scented or flavored, if you will, tea. It's extreme. I have paced off how far away from my osmanthus I can smell it. And it's 100 paces away, and my pace is a yard. So about
Wow.
300 feet away from that, I can smell the osmanthus downwind from it. It is probably one of the most fragrant shrubs there is. Little tiny flowers, you barely
Is it a
notice
big
them.
bush?
It's a slow-growing shrub that looks kind of like a slightly drab privet. Not all that interesting or exciting. It's upright. It can become almost a tree with age, and you can mix it with other shrubs as a sort of a mixed evergreen border, and it'll just be this thing there. And then all of a sudden, more typically in the spring, but also often a heavy bloom in the fall, Osmanthus fragrans will give you this powerful, powerful bloom. And there is an orange colored one called Aurantiacus, which if you know your Latin, that just means orange. And that one is particularly strong fall blooming and exceptionally fragrant. Hard to find in the trade, but it's out there.
Would that mix with my xylosma?
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of these, it's a olive-ish green color. So it's sort of a drab, that's a bad word. It sort of blends in with other things, and there it is. It's fairly open in habit. It's not a terribly dense shrub under most circumstances. So just mix it with others, let it grow as tall as it wants to get, and then you get this unbelievable fragrance in spring and often in the fall, and especially in the fall in the case of the orange-flowered one.
Well, since I'm have trouble with the
The shade is okay, by the way.
no, really,
Yeah.
okay, but I have trouble with the smells of certain plants,
Yeah,
like privets
maybe
and
I
things
should
like
bring
that.
you a sample
where
first.
where in town is one of these things so I can go sniff it now?
We have a couple blooming. You could just
In-
stop
in
by.
the- in the
I
nursery?
think we have a couple in bloom. If
Oh,
not, I'll
okay,
bring
I'll go
some in
check it
for-
out.
I'll bring one in and set it here in the studio
Okay.
and see how you react.
So
yeah,
that
it's
was
potent. That's
that was
number one.
What the second one
And
was?
for those of you listening who know the sunset zones, the Western Garden Book listed as zones 5 through 7, so that goes colder than here. And then, of course, 8, 9, 12 through 24, which means Bay Area, Southern California, and the Sacramento Valley. It seems to exclude the desert zones. I'm not sure why. Perhaps it just doesn't like the dry heat. I don't know. Seems like it would
But
be
the
okay.
Davis, it has
Seems
dry
like
heat.
it would be okay in the shade, at least in the
Yeah.
desert. And they mentioned zones 5 through 7 with protection, so a little frost protection. The next one, next two are not actually listed for this zone, but I guarantee they grow here. Brugmansia.
That's Angel's trumpet.
Yes, it looks like a datura, for those of you who know datura, but on a much more massive scale. And there's a really good example, I assume it's still there, in the Carolee Shields White Garden at the Arboretum, was on the south side, big plant. White blooms on that particular one, white hanging trumpet blooms that are about a foot long.
They're about as long as your arm,
Well,
from
they're-
the elbow to your wrist.
And you walk up to it in the day and you won't smell anything. And then if you have it outside your kitchen window, as I do, all of a sudden this extremely almost narcotic aroma comes in.
as soon as the sun sets.
And it's attracting moths. It's a night pollinated shrub. And they get in our area 10 to 12 feet and freeze back consistently, intermittently is the term I use.
But they grow back,
But come
too.
back, yeah. So they freeze back some years and not so much other years. And there's some well-established plants around the area. In the Bay Area, and I'm sure in Southern California, it turns into a small tree. All parts of the plant are toxic. Be aware of that, depending on where you choose to locate it. But it's one of these evening-scented, night-scented blossoms that's just amazing. I mean, it's overpowering. It's the kind of thing where I don't think everyone wants it right outside their kitchen window necessarily, but somewhere not far from the kitchen window would be kind of nice. Go ahead.
So the if you live in Davis and you know where the Arboretum is and you know where the headquarters of the Arboretum is, and I encourage you to go find that. There's a place there where there's like a little shade, a little roof structure with all this information about the Arboretum. And right there on the corner of the building, on the end of the Arboretum, there is one of them,
Yeah.
and it's a beautiful thing to go and
And
see.
there's a couple of Victorians up in Woodland that have been restored, and one of them, at least years ago, I drove by, and they had a couple of these right out front, focal points in full bloom, quite spectacular.
And then the third one.
Well, first of all, the zones for Brugmansia.
Okay.
Sunset listed as 12, 13. They're where are those? And 16 to 24. So they specifically exclude us here in the valley. But we know that they will grow here, they just freeze back. So be aware of the winter appearance and the fact that even in a hard freeze, it may be killed to the stump, it'll almost surely come back. Mine went down in 1990. My Brugmansia was killed to the stump, and I thought for sure it was dead. I mean, we got to 16 degrees that year.
Yeah.
And up around May, it popped again, and that plant is still there.
So it says Brugmansia, which is the genera name, but there's no species.
There's
Is there
several-
lots of different kinds?
There's a couple species and a few hybrids, and they differ mainly in the color of the flower. And I think
Okay.
they're all about equally hardy. Give them room; they're big.
Okay.
And mine is in full afternoon sun, and it looks really bad on a hot day. it's fine. It just looks really bad on a hot day. So if you want it to look better, I'd suggest afternoon shade. The third one is Cestrum nocturnum,
Jessamine.
night blooming jessamine, and also poisonous, by the way. That is a plant that I planted in my garden in coastal San Diego, right outside my window. And in coastal San Diego, where it's frost-free, it turns into about a 15-foot shrub.
Oops.
Blocked the window. Well, that was cool with me. It didn't bother me. But when it came into bloom, I've said this many times, my mother at the other end of the house complained about it. She did not like potently fragrant flowers, and that one is potently fragrant. It's the kind where your eyes start to tingle and twitch a bit when it's in full bloom.
Maybe I should avoid that one.
Well, you can come over and snip a sample, because we have one in full bloom.
I'll just go sniff.
You snip. Well, here's the thing. You walk up to it during the day, nothing. Not even a hint of what is going to happen.
But if you snipped it,
If you
would
snip
it
and
open
put
it even at night?
Yes. Put it in
Oh.
a vase, bring it in your house, and you'll see what's involved. We often just take one of them when it's blooming right now and set it in the building as we leave at 5:30. And you come in the morning, and the entire building is potently scented by it. Hopefully everybody likes that. Night
But that,
blooming
again,
jessamine.
isn't supposed to grow here.
Yeah, they listed for zones 13 and 16 to 24. There's plenty of them around. You can just expect top damage in a normal winter here. And perhaps mine have been killed to the stump in hard winters, but they've come back. So for those of you in coastal areas in Southern California, this is an evergreen shrub. For us, it's one of those subtropicals, but that's our term for it. Well, yeah, it's evergreen, but it's subtropical. So, you'll see what happens.
It's not always green. Sometimes it died back.
Which one of these did you want me to do here?
That one.
Okay, there's lots of great programming here at KDRT, including our own folk brothers, Bill and Peter, who explore an eclectic range of music, including traditional folk of the British Isles and the United States, contemporary singer-songwriters on both sides of the Atlantic, and American roots music, plus some of its lesser-known offshoots. Tune in live Wednesday mornings, 10 to 11 a.m. on KDRT for replay times for that and all the other great programming here. Just visit cater.org and click the schedule tab.
I also want to mention that today I've got another author on. I encourage you to listen after this show is done. Listen to my show, That's Life.
That's Life.
Thursdays at 1.
Did you know that the Quail Ridge Wilderness Conservancy encompasses 2,000 acres overlooking Lake Berryessa?
I didn't know it was that big.
The reserve is home to a wide variety of flora and fauna native to California's inner coast range, from native oaks to rare bunch grasses, including purple needle grass, which is California's official state grass. Activities at Quail Ridge Conservancy include interpretive walks and eco-tours. For information on events, membership, volunteer opportunities, and more, call 530-219-4477 or just visit quailridge.org.
And we have a phone call. Oh, no. There it is. Yeah, it's back again. Hello, caller. Can you hear me? As that button pushed. There we go. Hello, caller. Can you hear me?
Yes, on the radio.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
There we go.
Very good.
Push the green button, Don.
Yeah.
Push the green button, Don. Another 10, 15 years, I'll get the hang of this. Yes.
Hello,
Yes,
Asa. What can we do
there's
for
hope
you
all of
today?
us. Okay. I want to do some pruning, and I'm not sure this is the right time to do it. I have an Accabono that's about 10 years old, and it has grown super tall, fighting for sun, because I have so much growth near it. There is one low branch, though, also struggling for sun and doing quite well, that unfortunately is unsightly.
Okay.
Now, where it connects to the trunk, its diameter is no more than about 1.25 inches.
Okay.
Is now an all right time to cut it?
I'm going to say yes. You raise an interesting question, because we've been telling people now for 8 or 10 years not to prune fruiting cherry trees in the winter because of a disease that attacks them. We're talking about sweet cherries and pie cherries, because the open pruning wounds in the rainy season are susceptible to infection.
But it's not raining.
Well, this is my point, is that I would usually say, Prunus accabono, prune it in the winter when it's dormant. And I think, wait a minute, that's a cherry. It is a flowering cherry. So I would say I'm going to go with now. It's going to be my answer. I'm going to do a little more research on this topic and see whether that is susceptible to the same bot rot that attacks fruiting cherries, but you're probably better off, probably safer to cut that off now. Maybe not today when the north wind is blowing 30 miles an hour just for your own safety, but in terms of the safety of the tree, we want that pruning wound to heal over before the rain, at least with fruiting cherries, and I'm going to extend this logic to your flowering cherry.
I think it's reasonable.
Yeah.
And I want to share with you a positive story. About 9 months to a year ago, I addressed you about my bamboo muley,
Yes.
Muhlenberger dumosa grass.
Yes.
And the result of our conversation was that you recommended I cut off up to half the root mass because all of these were growing in pots.
Yeah.
Well, we did cut off half the root mass.
That's a fun
about
job.
4 or 5 months ago.
Yep.
And the grass is thriving.
So you just basically, you're doing it the way we would do a bonsai. I mean, when you're growing a plant in a container and you can't keep putting it in a bigger and bigger container, at some point you'll find it's so root bound that it's hard to keep it watered and fertilized properly. So with a plant like that, I think, the simplest thing is to just trim off a certain percentage of the roots, fresh soil, same pot, and start the process over again.
Except what I did was all but one went into the ground
Ah, okay.
because I've cut down 5 junipers.
Oh, good. Always
And-
happy to hear that.
Yes, and so it brings in a lot of light.
I try not to be prejudiced against plants, but there are certain ones that I'm generally happy to hear people removing. Most
Yes,
junipers.
it's a fire hazard.
Yeah, junipers and privets, and in particular the junipers are in that regard. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, glad it
At
worked.
any rate, it was a success story.
That's a cool plant. It's a very nice grass that has a real informal growth habit, and I think it can be featured as a real focal point in a lot of landscapes. People aren't that familiar with it. They know the deer grass and the other Muhlenbergias, but they don't know the bamboo muley, which is called that because it sort of resembles bamboo in appearance, not because it, runs all over the yard. It looks like a clumping bamboo.
Well, I'm not that familiar with bamboo.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't remind me of any of the bamboo I am familiar with,
Mm-hmm.
but I call it fairy grass.
Fairy grass.
And it is getting a focal point
Yeah.
in certain parts of my yard.
Yep.
It's so fairy-like, airy.
Ethereal.
Yes,
Okay.
ethereal.
Ethereal.
Okay, thank you,
All
folks.
right, so
Thanks
for
for the
calling.
call, Acer.
Bye-bye.
And if you would like to call, feel free to do that. And the phone number is on that little ringer there, and you can read it right there, Don.
792-1648.
Area code 530.
Okay. Here you go.
Good, because I finished up that other paper.
Yep.
Oh, it's a chart. Come
Yeah,
on,
you
it's
can
a
read the
chart.
you can read the first part.
It's the second week of October. For cool season vegetables, which can we still plant? What can we expect? When can we harvest them? What will be happening? What might be getting too late to plant?
It's a funny time of year because we can go from feeling like summer to feeling like winter in the span of, feeling like fall. in
And
the
then
span
feeling
of a
like
week,
summer again,
right
and then
back.
feeling, yeah.
And so people literally on the same day will say, I've heard it's too late to plant. And the next person will say, isn't it kind of early to put these in?
Yeah.
And the nurseryman is pounding his head on the wall.
Okay, so
there
you
are
have
some.
categories 1, 1A, and 2. What does that mean?
Well, you've got it. So you'll.
I know.
so
One
no-
is broccoli, but
So
it doesn't
one,
say.
okay. The first things are things that you're going to just use as needed, use as they're growing. You don't have to wait for them to make a head. You're just
okay.
using the leaves. All right. So that includes, of course,
Broccoli rabe.
lettuce and kale and things like that. Yes, broccoli rabe, which more and more people are getting familiar with.
Broccolini or asperbrock.
Asperbrock is one of my favorite new words. That's where
It's
they
like asparagus
No,
and
they
broccoli?
did not cross asparagus with broccoli.
That's what it sounds like.
They made a form of broccoli that has a stem that you would use kind of like asparagus. Is really what it comes down to. It's not an asparagus. You could not cross asparagus
That's
and
what
broccoli.
I thought. Collards.
Collards and kale, which
Kale.
are actually basically the same plant, believe it or not. Pretty much. They're
Mustard
like,
greens.
They're pretty much the early primitive form of all those other things. Mustard greens, yes.
Hey, we got another call.
Okay.
This is amazing. Pak choi and Swiss chard. We'll do the rest later. First, we take this call. So he unplugs that. He undoes that. Okay, call back. call back because, well, just call back.
Okay. So the things that you use pretty much from the time you plant them, you can keep planting right on through the winter. This is
So you just trim off the edges?
Yeah, trim leaves as you use them. Cut a whole thing if you want to. Stick another one in. That goes for spinach, lettuce, leafy greens, mustard greens, things where they send up a stem like broccoli Rob does, but then a new one forms after you cut that one off, and so forth. So you can plant those all winter long. This is a new concept to people who move here from other areas. So those are things you'll find in nurseries all the way through till next February, and there's no time limit on putting them in particular.
Okay. The phone is ringing. We will try that one more time. Hello, caller. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi. Who's this? This is Lois.
Hi, this is Janine from Danville, California.
Hi, Janine.
Hi, so I have a Dr. Hurd manzanita,
Yes.
and when is the best time to prune it up? It's at least 5 feet tall. It's been in the ground for a while.
Okay.
So when can I prune those lower branches so I can see the beautiful bark?
We do like to do that because the bark of the manzanita is one of the main things we're growing it for, and to really accentuate the tree-like appearance. Dr. Hurd is one of the best garden manzanita varieties. Just like actually the previous caller, we like to do that when it's not raining. And
So that's now.
Now, yeah. I would go
Yeah.
ahead and trim it now, take the branches off strategically, a few of them, and open it up a little bit. The only reason being, if I recall, just like with the ceanothus, you don't want open pruning wounds in the rainy season. So I think you're safer to do it this weekend than waiting until we're into wetter weather.
Fantastic, that works.
Good.
I have one more question.
Go for it.
My husband planted hops this year. And he harvested some and
Yep.
made some beer.
Yep.
Should he be cutting them back now or not watering them?
Well,
He
you
doesn't know what
can.
to
I
do
mean,
with them now.
there's a big hop vineyard right near us here, and I've watched the whole process they go through. They pull the whole vine down when they're harvesting, but that's mainly for the harvest. They do it because they're 14, 15-foot vines, and then some. They can eventually grow to 20 or 30 feet. They pull them down, they harvest, they just cut them off, and that's that for the season. I have several
But
hops.
does it come back the next year?
Yes, it comes back very vigorously. It's a rhizome, and if anything, you're going to have that hop vine forever. I have several because my son says he's going to make beer, and so sure, I'll grow him hops. Why not? And I don't do anything. We harvest them. We enjoy the aroma. He takes them, and sometimes he makes beer. I just leave the tops there, and they defoliate completely in the winter, and they look very twiggy. And I've noticed they just disappear. Partly just sort of disintegrating. Sometimes I see birds in there pulling them apart for nesting material. So he doesn't have to cut them down, but they get pretty unsightly by midwinter. So he can do that now commercially. They cut them back at the time they harvest simply because that's the best, easiest way to harvest them. And it doesn't hurt the plant at all. You've got a tough rhizome down there. He should go ahead and water that a couple more times just to keep it plump and going into the rainy season. And that's all he needs to do.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks
Thank
for
you
calling.
for the call. Okay. That's great. Hey, 2 calls in one day. That's very good. All right, we're back to planting now for the winter. And the next one are things that you actually harvest. So
Yeah,
beets,
you grow now and harvest later. Yeah.
I'm going to read them, then we'll talk about each one. Beets, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower romanesco, peas, and turnips.
So in the case
So-
of the root vegetables, obviously you want to grow a nice, healthy, big plant. You need to get a pretty good head start. Yep, you still got time for that here and anywhere in lowland California,
So
pretty
that's
much.
beets and turnips.
Beets and turnips, and they'll be harvesting late winter, spring, depending on how weather goes. What else was there?
Broccoli?
Yeah, anything that makes a head, like broccoli, cauliflower, romanesco. Broccoli's easy. Broccoli is one of the easiest winter vegetables to grow pretty much anywhere here. You plant it now, starting as early as late August, all the way into November, and they'll make a nice plant that will head up X number of weeks after you plant it, roughly. Planting in mid-October, you'll probably be harvesting in early February at this point. And ones planted later, we'll be harvesting in late February. The cauliflower is a little tricky, and older varieties really need to get a good head start, and then you have the issue of winter cold possibly damaging the heads. Honestly, folks, cauliflower is a hassle to grow. That's my opinion, and it gets full of slugs and various issues. So
We have a farmer's market that's very
Great,
good in
yeah.
Davis.
We should ask them how they keep the slugs out of it. But Romanesco everyone who has a winter garden should grow Romanesco at least once because
That's the
flower-
one with those
the
spiral
fractal flower,
vegetable.
fractal inflorescence. You can use that
Yeah.
term in your next conversation. Well, yeah, I'm growing fractal inflorescences in my vegetable garden. Very cool. They do take a while to get going. October planted Romanesco get about 2 feet across, usually by about early December. And I remember one year I got emails from 2 different customers who had planted them. They were really upset because they hadn't had it up yet. I said, well, be patient. They will.
Oh, so the bush gets 2 feet across.
It's a plant.
A
Yeah,
plant.
it makes a big crown at the base, just like cabbage does. If you've ever grown it, it looks basically the same as what a cabbage does. Big, open, 2 foot, 18 inch to 24 inches across, sometimes bigger, getting ready to form that thing in the middle. They're a classic biennial. And it sits through the December, January gloom and cold, and then starts to make the flower head in the case of the Romanesco or the cauliflower, or just the head itself in the case of cabbage. And so you harvest the Romanesco sometime in February, maybe as late as March. So they do still have time, but they don't harvest until next late winter or early spring.
And cabbage is a little bit earlier than that, isn't it?
It depends. There's actually 60-day cabbages and 90-day cabbages. Cabbage is such a staple in the cold climate parts of northern Europe and places like that. You have varieties that'll make a head in 60 days. You have varieties that take a whole 100 days and make these enormous heads. You have the Savoy cabbage, if you're familiar with those crinkly ones. They're very cold tolerant, so they grow them in the Netherlands and Poland and places like that, where they can actually get snowed on and they'll still form heads. And so you've got a bunch of different varieties there, and you kind of need to know what you're getting in for. But any of them planted mid-October will probably harvest February to April, depending on the kind.
But if a cabbage is a 60-day cabbage, wouldn't it be December?
Barely, just almost. Depends on how December goes. So
Okay.
yeah, sometimes
So it's 60
sometimes
days
they're-
plus or minus weather.
Yeah, we have that period from mid-December to mid-January where not much is growing here.
That's
in
the
valley.
great time.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
the only part that is not growing season here officially. So those of you listening in colder climates will have to calibrate accordingly.
Okay, and then there's the other bunch. There's actually 2 more bunches. One is carrots, onions, and radishes.
Yeah, you plant them for roots. You're planting them now. In the case of radishes, you'll harvest in 6 weeks. Radishes, you should always plant them with kids. They're great.
And keep sprinkling a few more,
yeah.
and you'll have them forever.
For sort of steadily. Carrots take a long time to germinate and have a long time to grow. So carrots planted now, you'll be harvesting probably in March. And you should have really good, fast-draining soil and be sure to keep them well watered. If the rains come along and do their thing, great. But if there's gaps in the rainfall, like the drought years, where we went one whole January without a storm, your carrots would have looked okay, but the roots would be damaged by the drought.
And the roots are what we're
and
looking
they
for.
didn't develop properly. Yeah, we had some. That's an odd situation, but droughts happen. So.
And onions,
Onions
for bulbs, onions.
Yeah,
Now, those
of
aren't really
choices.
underground, are they?
they're underground. It depends-
Onions grow underground?
Yes, and it depends on where you're listening to us as to how you're going to handle your onions. If you order your onions from the biggest onion purveyor down there in Texas, Dixondale Farms, they're not even going to start shipping till January. They'll ship them out at your appropriate planting time, wherever you're listening, Long Island, Michigan, whatever. They'll ship them to you, whatever is your spring planting date. Here in the
But
Sacramento
we have
Valley,
a winter season.
we plant in the fall.
Yeah.
We get our onions in bare root in November, 1st or second week of November. You plant them. They actually grow through that December, January gloom. They make lots of foliage in February and March. And then starting about May to June, you're getting ready for harvest, depending on the variety. So be sure to give them enough room that you won't necessarily need early in the spring or summer garden, because they do, in many cases, don't even come out of the ground until May to June. They happen to go really well with peppers. You just taking them out about the time it's time to put in your peppers, that happens to work very well. So they're kind of unique among all these winter vegetables.
So those are the bulb onions. But if you want green onions,
Anytime.
you can do that like you do lettuce.
Anytime. You can plant them from little 6-packs. You can harvest them. And yes, by the way, those do turn into bulbs. I mean, if you leave them long enough, they
Yeah.
will make a bulb. It's a kind of a peppery.
But you can
rather-
eat them all the time.
Yep. Yeah, they're used that way. So.
Okay, and then the last 2 are Brussels sprouts and rutabagas.
Too late.
Too
I'm
late.
so sorry you've missed the season.
I've missed my rutabaga season, huh?
It isn't
Oh, well.
completely too late, but it's getting there. Those are 2 plants that need a long time going into the cool weather for them to properly form up bulbs. Or
Okay,
whatever.
Don, I have an assignment for you.
This is the third installment of this
Yes.
assignment.
Okay. I want something spectacular blooming in my yard every month of the year with as little input from me as possible.
In other
Water,
words-
maybe trim
in other
every now
words,
and then.
I'm
Showy
lazy
flowers.
and I want
Easy
flowers, yeah.
idea.
Okay, we've already done the first 2. We did winter and we did spring. Now we're doing the period
These
of
are for when they bloom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we period of spring to early summer.
All right.
Late spring, early summer. And I had a couple that I started with, and I kept adding more. 'Cause there's so many to choose from in this
Well,
particular
let's start
time
with the
period.
two that he put down first because they were the popped right into his head.
Yeah.
Agapanthus.
Yeah, you really can't go wrong. I mean, there's a reason there's
Well, you
an
can't go
agapanthus.
wrong, but you can overdo it. That is to say, they will seed
You know-
everywhere.
You know, most people actually remove them before they go to seed. They
Really?
remove the flower heads before they go to seed. But
Oh.
you can do that. It's okay.
Well,
You're
but there
allowed
would-
to do that.
But there's like 30 plants out there. I'd have to be crawling through
No,
all
you
sorts
just
of
walk
stuff
out
to
and-
get to
walk
them.
out and cut. Yeah,
Well, no, but you haven't seen my meadow. There's no way I walk in my meadow.
I can think of worse problems.
it's
than
sort of
having
like a brush field there.
Agapanthus is the lily of the Nile. They're everywhere in California, and there's a reason. They bloom without any care whatsoever. And now there's a bunch of new varieties, too.
Right.
It's really cool. Some that bloom for even longer period. Probably recede even more.
Okay, and then there's the landscape roses. And
that's
so
a-
these are the short things.
Yeah, well, they're not necessarily short, but it's a catch-all term for roses that are pretty low care that just bloom without you having to do anything necessarily. The carpet roses, the drift roses, ones like Iceberg, the Morden series that are used in parks up in Canada, the knockout roses that are used so much back east. You don't have to prune them. You may. You might want to deal with disease problems, but usually they'll bloom in spite of them. So these are just very low care roses. They give a lot of bloom with very little input.
All right, and then he had a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah, just run through.
Deities.
Yeah, but that's fortnight lily. Blooms without really any attention whatsoever.
Daylilies, there's a lot of those.
In
but
particular,
he likes
though,
Stelladora.
Oh, well, I mentioned that one. It reblooms constantly. I mean, the joke is that it blooms 362 days a year and only takes major holidays off. I mean, it is blooming even when it's trying to go dormant in the wintertime. Stelladoro has become the generic dwarf daylily, and it just blooms constantly. There's a bunch of variants of it now.
Raphiolepsis?
Yeah, India hawthorn blooms without any care, rather overplanted, but yeah, definitely lots of bloom. One
1
minute left.
Alstroemeria?
Absolutely. Yeah, proven.
Plumbago?
Yep, that's a California specialty, pretty much, perhaps in the southern states. Lots of bloom through the summer.
Butterfly rose?
That's a unique rose, and that'll be the last one for today. That is Rosa chinensis mutabilis is the name I know it by. It's an Arboretum all-star. It's a big plant that sprawls 8 feet if you let it, but also can be pruned hard. I have one customer that prunes it like a hedge. Mine is out on an area where it gets watered, I'm serious, once a month, and it does fine. It kind of blooms when I water it and stops when I don't. Other than that, it doesn't seem to mind that particular pattern. It is called mutabilis because the flower goes from yellow to orange to red as it ages, it darkens. And when you look at the plant, you'll have all these different colors, the yellow, orange, red, all at the same time. It looks like a host of daffodils has landed on the bush. So it's a species rose. It's a variety of a species rose. It's extremely easy to grow. Who is on your show today?
Diane is sitting right out there, and she'll be on shortly. We're talking about rock climbing and all that stuff. It's an autobiography.
Roseanne, so she's an author.
Yes, didn't I tell you? I'm having all these authors on now.
So that is coming up at 1 o'clock here at KDRT on That's Life. You've been listening to the Davis Garden Show with Don Shore.
And Lois Richter here at 95.7 LP Davis, California.